The last week, we had over 4,000 competitors battling it out in Pokemon Pocket tournaments across the internet. Today, we're going to be diving in to talk about some trends, week over week, performance metrics among the best decks, and then we're going to call out some off-meta things that put up some strong performances. Let's go ahead and jump into it, shall we? To kick things off with some week over week comparisons, our starting distribution, even with the increased number of competitors, was very similar this week compared to last week. Pikachu EX decks composed about 30% of the over 4,000 decks being played. Mewtwo gained a small amount to about 25% of the starting field, and Charizard remained at just under 7%. To throw a new deck list up on the tracker this week, though, we had the Arcanine EX deck that I called out last week as being a star finisher in the off-meta section, had 2% of the deck list registered of our over 4,000 competitors in this third week of competition. Moving along to our performance indicators, we have a little bit of a different story this week, with Pikachu still having a strong performance, increasing its starting 30% metagame share to 43% of the top placing deck list. But Mewtwo really had a breakout week this week as things have been optimized more inside of that archetype. It took its 25% starting metagame share up to 35% of the top performing lists. This means in combination, Pikachu and Mewtwo represent upwards of 78% of the top finishing decks in our tournaments this week. Charizard EX decks continue to underperform, shrinking from 7% of the starting metagame to about 5% of the top performing decks. And our new deck on the scene and in the pie chart this week, Arcanine EX, increased its just under 2% starting share to just over 2%, which is an overperformance of about 0.5%. The thing pushing Mewtwo deck performance up this week looks to be the inclusion of additional basic Pokemon, with primarily Baby Mewtwo, i.e. non-EX Mewtwo, being a notable inclusion in a number of top performing lists, with many including a 10th Pokemon as well. So you have a variety of different things that you can open on. This doesn't surprise me from a game theory standpoint. I've been beating the drum of play more basics in Pokemon Pocket since the first day I was playing the game. While yes, expanding the number of basics that you're playing past just 2 lines means that your best draw comes together a little bit less consistently with how Pokeball works. It does, however, raise the floor of your average draw by giving you a more diverse set of game plans, and more specifically making it so the draws where you just have 2 routes with nothing else to do come fewer and further between. This increased in consistency on your average, while bringing down your likelihood of your best draw a little bit, is a lot better for tournament play, where consistency is especially important across dozens of tournament rounds that you need to be winning. Baby Mewtwo serves a twofold purpose in these decks. The first is that it is a solid wall that only gives up 1 knockout point if your opponent manages to take it down, and unlike things like Kangaskhan or Snorlax or Chansey, it has a retreat cost of 2, meaning with an X speed, you can often get it out of the way and put up your attacker when it's ready, as opposed to allowing to your opponent to dictate when exactly they're taking your wall down. In a pinch, Baby Mewtwo can also be an attacker, while 4 energy is a little bit slow. If you draw it in the late game, once you have Gardevoir online, it's not unreasonable to start attacking with it before the game is over. Checking in on EX Pikachu trends this week, the Zapdos EX Zebstrika pairing alongside Pikachu is definitely the most popular across all of our tournament entries. However, the best performing is definitely the Raichu variations, featuring 1 to 2 copies of Lieutenant Surge. This build has a solid leg up in the Pikachu EX mirror match, as you can pivot into this Raichu and then push energy onto it, finishing off any of your opponent's EXs in a single blow. To highlight the Arcanine EX deck really quick that we added to the pie chart this week, it is a Moltres variation similar to the Charizard EX decks that gets set up quicker, only needing 3 energy to attack, and has less moving parts since you only need a stage 1 instead of a stage 2. The basic idea of this build is Arcanine EX's 120 point attack gives you enough damage to take out anything in the Pikachu deck in one hit sans Zapdos, and your 2 copies of Giovanni lets you break that 130 point as well to clear absolutely anything they put out relatively quickly. Based on the solid performance this archetype had across a variety of tournaments this week, I would wager this is one we're going to see continue to increase in meta share while continuing to put up solid results, as long as Pikachu is one of the most popular decks in the format. While the good decks are obviously great, there's also a lot of other things that are finding success in these pocket tournaments. I combed through the over 4,000 deck list to find some standout off-meta things for you all at home. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the sweetest deck lists that had strong finishes this week. We kick off with a Greninja Weezing deck that I absolutely love from a theory perspective. Greninja is a powerful stage 2 Pokemon when things come together, letting you hit things on the bench so your opponent can't even retreat things that are low to safety. And Weezing is the perfect front end for it, having a tanky health pool that can also put up damage. I also love that Weezing's Pokemon ability means that even in games where your energy aren't lining up correctly in your 2 energy colored deck, you can still get damage going by poisoning the opponent's Pokemon. Greninja works similarly, with Froakie and Frogadier attacking for colorless and then not needing any energy for Greninja's Pokemon ability to come online. The 5th basic in this particular build is Articuno EX, which also works well with the single copy of Misty to high roll on occasion, but it's worth noting there was another deck list that was very similar to this, playing Bruxish in that 5th basic slot as well. Our next standout deck list is a Greninja Flareon deck that actually put up results in 2 different tournaments in the hands of the same player. Flareon is a really interesting stage 1 attacker here, so requires 2 colorless and a single fire, so works pretty reasonably in a 2-color shell and cracks for 110 points of damage. When we combine this with Greninja's Water Shuriken, this means you can clear things with up to 130 points of health in a single attack, or even get up to 140 if you have your copy of Giovanni. Flareon also acts as just a high HP single knockout point Pokemon that can buy you time to build up your Greninja in the back and dole out Water Shurikens while you're getting set up. This deck list is playing Tauros as well as Kangaskhan as additional starting Pokemon that can do a mixture of deal damage and take hits while you get set up. Up next, we have a really sweet take on Dragonite featuring 2 copies of non-EX Articuno. This Pokemon notably has 100 HP and a retreat cost of just 1, meaning it can frontline to take some hits while we set up Dragonite, and it can get out of the way with minimal retreat cost when Dragonite's ready to go. This deck list is also playing 2 copies of Misty, meaning you give yourself the ability to high roll with this Articuno to start paralyzing your opponent and actually deal out damage in some games to get some free wins. One kind of head scratcher card in this deck list for me is the singleton copy of Porygon. I wonder if that was perhaps a budget thing, missing a second Kangaskhan, but it also could have been far-fetched in that case, so I would love to know in the comments down below if you can think of a reason why Porygon could be optimal here. Up next, we have Blastoise EX finally doing some numbers in Pokemon Pocket. The first thing that's noteworthy about this build is that you want to make sure you only have water energy in your energy zone. You can edit that while building the deck. The baby Mewtwo's in here purely exist as a way to take damage that you can then retreat to put Blastoise up. It's generally better to have a baby Mewtwo as opposed to the singleton copy of Snorlax, because a retreat cost of 2 versus 4 is a big difference. Snorlax basically makes it so your opponent has full control over when your Blastoise gets into the active spot, which give them a lot of maneuverability around beating our big finisher. This deck list is also playing 1 copy of regular Articuno as an additional way to high roll with its 2 copies of Misty to buy time for our boy Blue to get set up in the background. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the one copy of Snorlax in this deck list because, like I mentioned, it locks you in and gives your opponent a lot of control of the game. I think that would likely be better as either a second Baby Articuno or a singleton Kangaskhan. Up next, we have an Onyx Kabutops deck list that's getting Brock in our best decks roundup for the first time this week. Onyx is a card that I think is actually pretty playable. Something like Sandslash, i.e. a stage 1 that hits for 70 for 2 energy, has a lot of parallels to Onyx, whose 3 energy attack is kind of 2 energy plus a Brock, but it has the fail case of if you're missing Brock, you can build it up more slowly over a couple of turns. You also have some really sweet high rolly draws where you go first with Onyx and have 2 copies of Brock and get to attack with Onyx for 70 on your second turn of the game while being at an energy disadvantage. I think Kabutops in particular is a pretty solid Pokemon pocket card into the Pikachu matchups and others that aren't explicitly Mewtwo that will one-shot it in a single hit. Finally, we had a couple of solid finishes for different Pidgeotto variations. One of them is an Executor EX build, which has a lot of parallels to the Victory Bell deck that we featured last week. And the other is a Marowak EX build, which I think complements Pidgeotto really well because the fighting typing lets you line up strongly into Pikachu, which would typically have a type advantage over our stage 2. I think Hitmonlee in the fighting build of this deck list is especially sweet with Pidgeotto since the drive off can give you a lot of control over what's on your opponent's bench or not, letting Hitmonlee have a good time kicking into that backline. Well, Mewtwo and Pikachu are obviously the 2 decks to beat in this format. The slowly increasing popularity of Arcanine EX, as well as the huge range of other off-meta things that are putting up results in these piles of community tournaments, show that there's still a lot of things to maneuver and explore in this format. I would love to hear in the comments down below what deck lists you have been enjoying. I'd also like to say thank you for making it all the way through to the end of the video. If you're someone that's new to the channel, consider hitting that subscribe button and coming back again sometime. And don't forget to like this one if you enjoyed my data breakdown. If you're not familiar with me, my name's Jeff Hoagland. I've been making card game content here on the internet for the better part of a decade now, and I've been doing it as a full-time job for the last 7 years. Before Pokemon Pocket, I spent a ton of time playing games like Marvel Snap, Magic the Gathering, Legends of Runeterra, and lots of others. In a former life before I was focused on content, I have a graduate degree and undergraduate degree in mathematics. I spent time doing data analytics at a Fortune 50 company for a little time after grad school as well, before winding up doing this content thing full-time here on the internet. If you're someone that enjoys very data-driven breakdowns like this video, as well as exploring lots of off-meta things in daily deck highlights, this is a great place to be, and I'd love to see it back again sometime in the future.